Right, so much for Qatar's American security umbrella then, eh? On the 9th of September, as we know, Israeli missiles tore into Doha while 10,000 US troops sat idly nearby at Al-Udeid Air Base, doing very little, proving in a single night what the Houthis have actually been shouting about and warning of for years. Washington's bases are there to defend Israel, not the Arabs who might be actually hosting them. Qatar's capital was bombed under the shadow of CENTCOM's headquarters in the Middle East, as Al-Udeid is. Al-Udeid being the largest US airbase in the entire Middle East. And the best Donald Trump could do was beg Netanyahu, please don't do it again. Netanyahu's reply, of course, was one of open, deranged defiance, followed by threats of more strikes in Qatar and promises to get Hamas next time. All as if US red lines are drawn in disappearing ink. For Qatar, it was more than a humiliation, though. It was the collapse of the very bargain on which its security has rested for decades. The US promise in exchange for housing a massive airbase. Al-Udeid was once Qatar's shield. Now it looks more like a shackle. So is Doha about to smash it and send Trump the message he deserves after all of this? Right, so on the 9th of September, Israel did something that may well end up altering the strategic landscape of the Gulf into the far future, and not in their favour at all. Its air force struck the capital of Qatar, Doha, in an operation that killed senior Hamas officials and left a Qatari security officer dead, though failed to assassinate the leaders it actually wanted to, who they were actually targeting. The attack was extraordinary, not simply because of its brutality, but because of where it took place. Doha is not Gaza or Damascus. It is a wealthy Gulf capital, home to the most significant American military presence in the Middle East, Al-Udeid Air Base, where 10,000 American personnel and the forward headquarters of United States Central Command are stationed. For decades, that base has been presented as both symbol and substance of Washington's guarantee that Qatar and other Gulf monarchies are secure under the American umbrella. Yet on that September day, Israeli missiles fell on Doha anyway, and the umbrella did not open for them, did it? What were all those US personnel doing, by the way? Twiddling their thumbs? 10,000 of them. Israel's justification only deepened the insult, though. Netanyahu and his ministers cloaked the strike in the language of retaliation and security, as if bombing a US ally's capital and such a strategically important US site was a routine counter-terrorism measure. Israel Katz, Israel's demented defense minister, declared that Israel would strike wherever its enemies are, reducing Arab sovereignty to a scrap of paper. This sickening excuse then became part of the scandal, didn't it? Israel claimed the right to bomb Doha in order to feel safe in Tel Aviv. What could be more absurd? Doha's such a threat to Israel now. Everything's a threat to Israel when it's convenient, isn't it? Well, Qatar's leaders obviously reacted with fury. Publicly, they denounced the strike as state terrorism and a violation of their sovereignty. But sorry, guys, you're Arab. You're always going to be second best to Israel, and always will be. Privately, Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani told United States officials that he regarded the attack as a betrayal by both Israel and Washington. The betrayal was only compounded by what has happened afterwards, though. The big orange bloater passing himself off as president, Donald Trump, who remains in the White House, apparently telephoned Benjamin Netanyahu twice to demand that Israel promise not to repeat such an action. Oh, you're such a strong man, aren't you, Donny? Netanyahu not only refused to retreat, but allowed his ministers to declare that Israel would strike wherever its enemies are, including Doha again if necessary. He's not taking the blindest bit of notice. So for Qatar, the lesson should be humiliatingly clear. Hosting the largest American base in the region does not shield it from Israeli aggression. Israel will always come first for the US. Your sovereignty means nothing at the end of the day. The strike has therefore turned Al-Udeid from a supposed guarantee of security into a potential bargaining chip, though. Qatar, for the first time in decades, is now apparently openly considering whether to reevaluate its security partnership with Washington. The possibility of shutting Al-Udeid, or at least threatening to do so, gives Doha some unprecedented leverage now. But will they go that far? Do they have the nuts to do that? Can they go that far indeed? Do they have other options? Well, the strike on Doha was not a random act of violence. It came at a moment when Hamas officials were meeting in Qatar to review a ceasefire plan that had actually been circulated by Donald Trump. It was his plan. For decades, Israel has flouted conventions of diplomacy by assassinating Palestinian and Arab leaders abroad. But there had been at least an informal understanding that neutral grounds of mediation would be respected. And throughout the events since October 7th, we have actually seen Israel respect those spaces, so to speak, where mediation has been happening. Those areas certainly have not been attacked. Doha was precisely such a space, of course, not only because it hosted Hamas leaders, but because it was a partner of Washington in brokering these negotiations. In this case, Trump's own ceasefire proposal. But by targeting Hamas in Doha now, as they've done, Israel deliberately sabotaged diplomacy and humiliated its ally. Qatari officials described the strike as state terrorism, a language rarely used by Gulf monarchy, it has to be said. But what other languages are to use? Al-Thani told American envoys that he considered it a betrayal, not only by Israel, but by the United States itself, and his reasoning for that was very clear. Israel pulled the trigger, but Washington had failed to prevent it, had notified Qatar only at the last minute, in fact, too late, but 10 minutes too late from what the Qataris have said, and then offered no meaningful consequences for the violator. Even more humiliating was the aftermath. Trump's phone calls to Netanyahu revealed a president enraged, but actually powerless. So much for the strongman Trump. He has no power, he has no strength when it comes to Israel. In the first call, Trump reportedly told Netanyahu that the strike was unacceptable and must not be repeated. Yet the following day, Israeli leaders spoke publicly of striking again if Hamas remained in Qatar. Defence Minister Katz promised to attack wherever the enemy is, effectively declaring that no Arab capital is off limits. Israeli leaks gloated, "We'll get them next time," as if daring Qatar to expect further violation. Israel bombed a US ally under the shadow of America's own largest airbase in the Middle East, and Washington to do nothing but watch. To Arabs across the region, the message should be obvious. Israel is untouchable, and American red lines are meaningless, and if you think they are protecting you, you're clearly very wrong. For Doha, this has to be an existential insult now. Its capital had been bombed, one of its officials killed, its diplomacy sabotaged, its sovereignty mocked. And the United States, despite having the most formidable military presence in Qatar itself, had done nothing to stop it and could not even compel Israel to desist from threatening more. So the key to understanding why this event resonates so deeply lies in that role of Al-Udeid Air Base, though. Established in the 1990s and dramatically expanded after 2001, Al-Udeid is the largest American air base in the Middle East. It hosts around 10,000 American troops, strategic bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, drones. It's the forward command of Central Command. It was designed to not only be a launch pad for American wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, but also a physical guarantee that Qatar itself would be protected. The logic is very simple, isn't it? No state would dare attack a country hosting such a massive and powerful installation for fear of provoking the US and the US Army. Qatar's safety ought to have been ironclad. Yet September 9th proved otherwise. Israel struck Doha while Al-Udeid hummed away in the background doing very little. American radar systems tracked the attack, but there was no interception. According to reporting, US officials did not warn Qatar until it was too late to act, a fact that Doha views as at its best negligence and at worst complicit. In the aftermath, US officials condemned the strike as counterproductive and joined a United Nations Security Council resolution criticizing Israel's violation of sovereignty. Yet from Doha's perspective, the symbolism was irreversible. The supposed shield of Al-Udeid had not only failed to stop an attack, it had crumbled into a liability because Israel always gets its way. So to continue hosting Al-Udeid under these conditions is to signal that Qatar accepts subordination, therefore. It accepts that an American base on its soil is not a guarantee of sovereignty, but a mark of dependency instead, and that dependency has just proven to be very one-sided, protecting Israel above all else, even above the state where the base is actually situated. This is why Al-Thani's description of the incident as a betrayal resonates so widely. It is not simply that an ally failed, it is that the very structure of the alliance has been turned inside out. Al-Udeid was built as a shield, now it stands as a shackle. Yet if Al-Udeid is a shackle, it is also a potential weapon, precisely because the base is so crucial to American operations. The possibility of closure or restriction by Qatar gives Doha unprecedented leverage now. For the United States, the consequences of losing Al-Udeid would be dramatic. With forces withdrawing from Iraq already, Al-Udeid serves as the central hub for regional air campaigns and command. Without it, Washington would be forced to rely more heavily on much smaller bases in the likes of Kuwait, Bahrain and Jordan. Those facilities cannot replicate Al-Udeid's scale or its command infrastructure. Relocating CENTCOM's forward headquarters would be a logistical nightmare. Gulf observers are already questioning the reliability of the American umbrella now. If Qatar were to close Al-Udeid, that questioning would turn into a collapse of credibility. The image of American deterrence in the Gulf would be utterly shattered overnight. For Israel, actually, the stakes are equally high. Israeli freedom of action relies on the American grid of bases, refueling capacity, and intelligence infrastructure in the Gulf. Not that this seemingly occurred to the madmen who ordered this strike, or perhaps they just figured Gulf states would be ordered into line by the US. They would do as they're told, and who knows, they may still be proven right in that. A hostile or closed Al-Udeid, though, would mean not just the loss of logistics, but the terrifying prospect of alternative powers gaining access instead. If China, for example, were invited in to fill the gap, Qatar having strong economic ties via its LNG contract to China already, Israel would face the possibility of hostile monitoring of American-Israeli coordination. It would also lose the deterrent value of having American forces stationed on the soil of a Gulf ally that has long supported Palestinian causes rhetorically, but tolerated American presence practically for security. But that security is now obviously uncertain, so perhaps China, or somebody else, would be a better security partner for Qatar. Israel's defence lies partly in Doha's silence and acquiescence to the US. That silence might now have been broken irreparably. For Qatar itself, the leverage is both symbolic and material. Simply raising the possibility of closing Al-Udeid forces Washington to treat Doha's concerns seriously. It restores agency to a state that's just been humiliated. It demonstrates to Arab publics that Qatar is not simply a client, but a sovereign actor prepared to use its assets strategically. It also gives Doha bargaining power. Even if it does not close the base outright, it can use the threat of doing that to demand stronger guarantees from the US, more arms deals perhaps, or more visible pressure on Israel even. It's why some headlines are claiming that Qatar is saying its relationship with Washington is stronger than ever. Their position actually is. In the new equation, Al-Udeid is no longer just America's asset, it's Qatar's card to play in this equation now too. So the credibility of Qatar's leverage depends on whether it has plausible alternatives, though. I mentioned China as a for instance a moment ago, because the truth is that it does, even if none are as comprehensive as American protection, but needs must, right? And if you can't trust the US, well, there's got to be somebody else. Turkey's the most immediate option, massive military of Turkey have got, although they are very pro-West. Ankara has maintained a military base in Qatar since 2015 and expanded it during the Gulf blockade of 2017, when Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates attempted to isolate Doha. Turkish troops were a visible symbol of solidarity. Politically, President Erdogan has positioned himself as a champion of Gaza and an opponent of Israeli aggression, though he does of course keep supplying Israel with oil. For Qatar, deepening Turkish deployments might provide an alternative protector that resonates with domestic and regional publics, but those well-known pro-Israel ties wouldn't make it my personal pick still. China is the long-term bet. Qatar is Beijing's largest liquefied natural gas supplier with a 27-year deal signed in 2022, the longest and largest in Qatar's history. While China's little military presence in the Gulf, its economic leverage and diplomatic role as broker of the 2023 Saudi-Iran rapprochement makes it a credible alternative. Were Doha to invite limited Chinese security cooperation, well, that would send a powerful signal that the Gulf is no longer America's exclusive playground, and by selling out so heavily to Israel, who China are heavily critical of, they'll have only brought that on themselves, won't they? Iran is a neighbour that can never be ignored, though, isn't it? A deal with them would melt Trump's spray tan clean off his face, wouldn't it? Qatar and Iran share the massive South Pars North Dome gas field, the largest in the world, so they maintain diplomatic ties in mutual economic interest already. Tehran would welcome even closer security ties with Doha as a blow to both Israel and Washington. Aligning too openly with Iran risks alienating other Arab neighbours, though. But this is becoming less a priority for many of them, all things considered, I would argue. So quietly deepening coordination with Iran could serve as deterrence against further Israeli strikes, particularly given the hobbling Iran gave Israel last time they struck Iranian territory. But ultimately, as much fun as it is to speculate such scenarios, what this tells us is that Doha does not need to replace Washington outright. It only needs to demonstrate that it's got other options in order to get a better deal for itself. That demonstration alone still shifts the balance of power. And one of the most depressing features of the crisis has been the silence of other Arab states through it all. Neither the United Arab Emirates nor Bahrain, both Abraham Accord signatories, condemned the strike. Saudi Arabia, which constantly flirts with normalization, said nothing. Even Egypt, which is another mediator state, one that has worked closely with Qatar in the mediations between Hamas and Israel, and one that has also previously been threatened with Israeli attack, remained quiet too. So this silence is absolutely shameful. An Arab capital was bombed by Israel, yet other Arab rulers prioritized their own normalization deals and their own American patronages over solidarity with them. Such is the problem with so many of these wealthy monarchical states. They are too insular and inward looking at their own vested interests. The result is a devastating blow to the idea of pan-Arabism, or even basic Arab dignity. It confirms what many publics around the world already believe, that their rulers will sell out Palestine and their own sovereignty to maintain US support and their own power. It also vindicates the Houthis, though, because for months they have been warning all of these Gulf rulers that American bases on their soil does not protect their own citizens, does not protect Arabs. They only serve Israel. They have claimed that US protection is a mirage and that only resistance movements genuinely confront Tel Aviv. Doha's humiliation exonerates them completely. Every single word they've said is true. If Qatar simply maintains the status quo, the costs are going to be profound, though. It loses credibility as a sovereign actor, appearing unable to prevent further Israeli strikes despite hosting the most powerful military in the world. It undermines its role as mediator in Gaza, since no resistance group will trust Doha to protect them after Hamas leaders were bombed under its watch. Domestically, it risks alienating a population that strongly supports Palestine and resents Israel's impunity. And regionally, it allows rivals such as the UAE to present Qatar as weak and hypocritical, not that they can say much themselves, of course. Worst of all, it invites repetition. Netanyahu's ministers have already threatened further strikes. Katz has vowed to strike enemies wherever they are, and Israeli leaks promising to get them next time mean Doha must expect more. To continue hosting Al-Udeid under these threats is to invite humiliation twice over. Fool me once and all of that. To remain in the same position will not be taking a neutral stance, therefore. It's to accept that your shield is shattered, your protector is complicit, and your capital remains a target, and just being happy with that. The temptation to hedge is therefore a strong one. Expanding Turkish deployments would provide immediate cover. Deepening economic ties with China and opening the door to symbolic security cooperation would signal a major shift and would be a bloody nose to Trump. Quietly aligning with Iran on deterrence would raise the costs for Israel and the US as well. Officially, Qatar continues to deny that it is reassessing its relationship with Washington. As I said a moment ago, state media and officials insist that the partnership is stronger than ever. But these denials look tactical. They are designed to reassure Washington in the short term while keeping options open in the medium term. Beneath the surface, Qatar is clearly recalibrating because it cannot afford not to be after this. The danger for Washington is not just in Qatar, though. If Doha uses the Al-Udeid card, others may follow. Kuwait, Bahrain and Jordan, they all host American forces. Each now faces the same realization, though. Their sovereignty is secondary to Israel's impunity. Losing Qatar would make these states more indispensable militarily, but more vulnerable politically. Kuwait's parliament is vocal and could turn anti-American quite quickly. Bahrain's Shia majority already resents the monarchy's ties to Israel. Jordan's streets are furiously pro-Palestinian, no matter how much King Abdullah tries to clamp down on that sort of thing. If Washington is seen as sacrificing Arab sovereignty for Israel, hosting bases becomes a political liability. Saudi Arabia and the UAE tread more carefully. Neither condemned the strike, but neither celebrated it. They're just watching as per usual. If Doha successfully leverages Al-Udeid to extract concessions or diversify partnerships, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi might demand the same, though. Ultimately, the crisis forces a moral reckoning. What is the legitimacy of US bases in the Gulf if they cannot, or worse, will not, protect their hosts? Al-Udeid was supposed to be a guarantee of Qatar's sovereignty and protection. Instead, it's become the stage on which Israel humiliated it. Doha needs to ask whether continuing this arrangement is compatible with its identity as a sovereign state and its image as a defender of Palestine. Arab publics are asking the same. The silence of the Abraham Accord states only deepens the shame. The Houthis and Iran will argue that only resistance can defend sovereignty, and who's going to argue against that point right now? Washington, of course, will argue that its presence remains indispensable. Netanyahu will continue to threaten more strikes, ensuring that question cannot be avoided. And the world will ask, will Qatar dare to play the Al-Udeid card, or will it accept that its fate is bound forever to Israel's impunity and surrender any notion of its own sovereignty as a result. The Israeli strike on Doha has stripped away all the illusions now. It has revealed that American protection is conditional, that Arab sovereignty is expendable, and that Israel acts with impunity even against the US ally hosting the largest American base in the whole of the Middle East. Qatar can either keep Al-Udeid and live under perpetual humiliation, or it can wield the threat of closure to reclaim its sovereignty, force US concessions, and diversify its protectors. The silence of other Arab states makes Doha's position more isolated, but also more pivotal. If they play that Al-Udeid card, Qatar could transform itself from victim into leader and from client into actor, and in an area with such intense state rivalries, other states could well follow suit for fear of losing face. Al-Udeid was once Washington's guarantee, and they've destroyed that image. Now it is Qatar's leverage. Whether Doha dares to use it or not will decide not only its own future, but the balance of power in the Gulf and the credibility of the American presence in the Middle East. Shield shattered, base betrayal. The question is no longer whether Qatar has leverage. The question is whether or not it's prepared to use it. Does it have the guts to use it? For more on the Doha talks going up literally in flames at Israel's hands, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so, of course. Why not if you've been watching for a while, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, and as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.